The ruins were quiet, too quiet. Broken towers reached up like the bones of dead giants. The human soldier Daniel walked carefully through the dust, holding his torn bag close. He had been on this planet for weeks, maybe longer. The stars and the sky changed every night, and he had lost count of the days. His rations were gone. His body was weak. Only one thing remained in his bag, a single chocolate bar. Daniel looked at it many times that day, turning it in his hand, almost afraid. To eat it, it was not just food anymore. It was memory, the taste of home. The one thing that reminded him he was human, and not just another survivor in an alien wasteland. He sat under the shadow of a cracked wall, about to open the wrapper. His fingers trembled as he touched the thin foil. But then he heard something. A sound, soft, almost too soft. Like a whimper, his eyes scanned the rubble. At first he thought it was the wind. But then he saw her, a girl. Small, thin, her skin pale like moonlight but glowing faintly under the dust. Her eyes were huge, shining blue like broken glass. She was hiding behind a piece of stone, staring. At him with hunger and fear, Daniel froze. He had met aliens before, some friendly, many hostile. But this was different. She looked too fragile, too young to be a threat. Her clothes were nothing more than scraps of cloth tied around her. Her ribs showed under her skin. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. The girl's eyes locked on the chocolate bar. Daniel's stomach twisted. This was his last food. He gave it away. He might not survive another day. He knew that. But looking at her trembling hands, at the way her lips quivered as she tried not to beg, he felt something break inside him. Slowly, he opened the wrapper. The rich smell of chocolate filled the air. The girl's eyes widened, and her small body leaned forward unconsciously. Daniel hesitated. His heart told him one thing. His mind told him another. He could survive a little longer with this bar. She might not even make it through the night. But then he remembered something, his mother's voice when he was young. Daniel, food means nothing if you eat it alone. Share, and you'll never truly be starving. With a sigh, he broke the bar in half. The sound echoed in the ruins, sharp and final, like the breaking of his last safety. He held out one piece toward the girl. She stared at it, her lips parting in disbelief. For a moment she did not move. Then, slowly, like a frightened animal, she crawled forward on her hands and knees. Dust clung to her skin. Her eyes never left the chocolate. When she was close enough, Daniel extended his hand further. The girl reached out, her fingers brushing. His, they were ice cold. She took the piece, holding it carefully as though it were treasure. Then she sniffed it once, and before Daniel could blink, she put it in her mouth. The reaction was instant. Her eyes widened. Her pupils glowed faintly. Strange shimmer moved across her skin, like light underwater. She gasped, her hands pressing against her chest as though something inside her had woken up. Daniel pulled back, alarmed. "Hey, are you okay?"
But
the girl didn't answer. Her body shook. She dropped to her knees, clutching the ground.
Ah!
For a second, Daniel thought he had poisoned her. Maybe human food was toxic to her kind. He reached for her, ready to help. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes weren't just blue anymore. They burned with a soft silver light. Her lips trembled, and she whispered in a language he didn't understand. The words were foreign, but the way she said them, it felt like a vow. Daniel felt chills run down his spine. The girl crawled closer. Ah. She pressed her forehead against his knee, her hands trembling as if in prayer. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she kept whispering those strange words again and again. Daniel didn't know what was happening. All he knew was that the chocolate bar, the last piece of his old world, had just changed something he couldn't explain. The other half still rested in his hand. He looked at it, then at her glowing eyes, and he realized this was no ordinary act of kindness. He had done something bigger, something dangerous. The ruins around them suddenly felt heavier, darker. Somewhere in the distance, a low horn echoed through the wind. The girl lifted her head sharply at the sound. Fear flickered in her glowing eyes. She grabbed his hand, the one holding the rest of the chocolate, and shook her head violently. She whispered one word this time, in broken English: hide. Daniel froze. That word, simple as it was, carried a warning. Someone or something was coming, and for the first time he understood. Sharing his last bite had not only saved her, it had bound him to something far greater than survival. Asterisk night fell heavy over the ruins. Broken towers turned into black teeth against the sky, and the cold air bit through Daniel's worn jacket. He sat close to a shattered wall, watching. The alien girl huddled beside him. She had not spoken much since eating the chocolate. Only one word: hide. But her body had changed in a way he could not ignore. Her skin glowed faintly, a soft silver sheen under the moonlight. Her eyes shimmered like liquid metal whenever she blinked. Even the air around her seemed to hum, like invisible strings vibrating. Daniel had seen strange things in war, but never this. He wanted to ask her questions, but he could tell she was afraid. She sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest, clutching her arms, rocking slightly back and forth. Every now and then, she glanced at him as if making sure he was still there. Daniel sighed and leaned back against the stone. His stomach was empty, his throat dry. That chocolate had been his last strength. And yet, watching her eat it, seeing the tears in her eyes as if it was the first kindness she had known, he didn't regret it. But then he remembered the horn, that deep sound that had echoed through the ruins. It had not been natural. It was a call, a signal. Someone had heard. Someone was coming. The girl stirred suddenly, her glowing eyes widening. She whispered something in her own language, too fast for Daniel to understand. Then she reached forward and grabbed his wrist, tugging with surprising strength. "What? What is it?" he asked. But she only shook her head and pointed toward the shadows beyond the broken street. Then he heard it footsteps. Heavy, dragging, armored, more than one. Daniel's instincts sharpened instantly. He pulled the girl behind him and crouched low. His hand went to his belt where only a broken knife remained. No gun, no rifle, no grenades. He was nearly defenseless. 3 figures appeared in the distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying long spears that crackled faintly with blue energy. Their faces were hidden under bone-like masks, their eyes glowing red through slits. They walked with confidence, scanning the ruins carefully. Daniel cursed under his breath. He had seen their kind before. Warriors, hunters, not the kind who gave warnings before they killed. The girl trembled, clutching his arm tightly. Then, to his shock, she pressed her forehead against his hand again, just like before. A voice was desperate as she whispered in broken English, "You mine. Now, protect me." Daniel froze. What? What are you talking about?" But before he could ask again, the girl stepped forward. Her body shook, her silver glow brighter now. She raised her hands, and the humming in the air grew louder, almost like a swarm of bees circling around them. The hunters stopped, their red eyes fixed on her. One of them raised his spear and shouted in their guttural language. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Accusation. The girl shouted back, her voice cracking but filled with fire. She pointed at Daniel, then at herself, then pressed her hand against her chest. The hunters roared in response. The one in front slammed his spear against the ground. Blue sparks shot across the cracked street. Daniel stepped forward, putting himself between the girl and the hunters. "Stay back," shouted, his knife trembling in his hand. He knew how ridiculous it looked. 3 armored warriors against one starving human with a piece of metal. But he wouldn't move. Not now. The hunters advanced. But then something strange happened. The girl screamed not in fear, but in defiance. Her body flared with silver light, so bright Daniel had to shield his eyes. The humming grew into a pulse, shaking the stones around them. When Daniel looked again, the girl was different. Her hair floated around her head as if lifted by wind. Symbols glowed faintly on her skin, forming lines across her arms and neck. She spread her hands, and the ground beneath her cracked slightly. The hunters stopped, clearly unsettled. They growled to each other, their red eyes flashing. Daniel's mouth went dry. He whispered, half to himself, "What the hell are you?" Girl turned her glowing eyes to him. For a moment, she looked almost sad. Then she whispered softly, "You gave. Last bite. Now, bond." Bond. The word hit him harder than any weapon. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. That chocolate bar had not been just food to her. It had triggered something ancient, something sacred among her people. The hunters seemed to realize it too. They began to chant, their voices harsh and angry. They pointed their spears at Daniel now, not her. As if he was the one guilty of some crime, the girl stepped in front of him, arms spread wide, her silver light pushing against the darkness. She shouted at the hunters, her voice breaking but strong. Daniel realized then, she was not afraid of them, she was afraid of losing him. The hunters lowered their spears, but their glowing eyes promised they would return. With one final roar, they retreated into the shadows. Silence fell again. The girl collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. The glow around her faded slightly, though not completely, and Daniel knelt beside her, unsure what to say. She grabbed his hand again and whispered one final word before sleep pulled her down. "Chosen." Daniel stared at her in the moonlight, his heart racing, had shared his last chocolate bar. And now, somehow he had become part of something far bigger than survival. Something had begun, and there was no going back. The ruins were colder that night, the kind of cold that cut through skin and went straight to the bones. Daniel could barely feel his fingers as he sat near a broken archway, his eyes scanning the empty street. The alien girl lay curled beside him, asleep but restless. Even in sleep, her body glowed faintly, silver veins of light pulsing beneath her skin. Every time he looked at her, his mind spun with questions. Who was she? What had that chocolate bar really done? And why did those armored hunters want him dead after seeing her with him? The silence was broken by a soft whisper. At first, Daniel thought it was the wind moving through the shattered walls. But then he realized the sound was coming from her. The girl shifted in her sleep, lips moving, whispering words in her strange language. Daniel leaned closer, straining. To hear her voice was soft, almost fragile, yet there was power in it. The ruins seemed to hold their breath, listening. Suddenly she gasped and sat upright, her glowing eyes wide open. She looked around wildly, then grabbed Daniel's arm with trembling hands. "They come," she whispered, her voice broken but clear. Daniel's heart sank. The hunters again? She shook her head slowly, her silver hair falling across her face, not hunters. Worse, before Daniel could ask, a deep vibration shook the ground. It wasn't footsteps this time, it was something larger, something alive that made the stones tremble. In the distance, a strange sound echoed, a howl, low and drawn out. Filled with hunger, Daniel's grip tightened on his broken knife. His breath fogged in the cold air as he stood, ready. "What is it?" he demanded. The girl swallowed hard, then whispered a single word in English. "Beast." Daniel cursed under his breath. He had heard stories from soldiers' creatures that roamed abandoned alien worlds, feeding on anything unlucky enough to cross their path. But those were rumors. At least he had hoped they were. The girl's glow brightened slightly as if her body reacted to the danger. She clutched Daniel's sleeve like a child, but her eyes, silver and burning, watched the darkness with sharp focus. Then the whispering began again. Not hers, not the wind. Something else. A dozen voices, thin and echoing, drifting through the ruins. They spoke in a tongue Daniel couldn't understand, but the tone chilled his blood. It sounded like chanting. The girl stiffened. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Spirits, old ones. They wake." Daniel shook his head, trying to steady himself. He had survived war, ambushes, and alien traps. But this was something else, something ancient. The shadows moved. A shape emerged from the broken street, massive, hunched, crawling on four limbs. Its body was covered in dark scales that reflected the faint moonlight. Its mouth opened in a growl, showing rows of jagged teeth. The girl whimpered. Pressing closer to Daniel, The beast's eyes glowed faint red, like coals buried deep in ash. It sniffed the air, its gaze fixing on them. The whispering voices grew louder, as if calling it forward. Daniel stepped in front of the girl, his knife trembling in his hand. He knew it was useless against something that size. But his instincts screamed at him to protect her. The beast growled, lowering its head, ready to pounce, and then the girl screamed. Her cry wasn't of fear, but something deeper, older. Her silver glow burst into brilliance, lighting the ruins like a second moon. Symbols burned across her arms, her chest, even her face. The whispering voices cut off instantly, replaced by silence so heavy Daniel's ears rang. The beast stopped, mid-step, its red eyes narrowing. Daniel turned toward her in shock. She stood tall now, trembling but unbroken. Her voice rose, chanting in her own language, every word filled with power. Ow. The silver light pulsed outward like waves, pushing against the darkness. The beast growled louder, but it hesitated. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in its eyes. The girl's voice shook, but she didn't stop. Her glow wrapped around them both, forming a faint shield of light. She looked at Daniel then, her eyes soft but fierce. "You safe. I keep you safe." Daniel's throat tightened. He had never asked her for protection, yet here she was, this fragile, starving girl, standing against a monster for him. The beast howled in frustration, its voice shaking the stones. Then, with a final glare, it retreated into the darkness. Disappearing into the broken streets, the silence returned, but Daniel knew it was not victory. It was only a pause. The girl collapsed to her knees, her glow dimming. Sweat poured down her face, and her breath came in sharp gasps. Daniel knelt beside her, steadying her trembling body. "What the hell is happening?" "Dot," he whispered, his voice raw. The girl looked at him with weary eyes. Slowly she pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart. "Bond. Strong now. Do you mine? I yours." Daniel felt his chest tighten at her words. He didn't fully understand them, but deep. Inside, he knew this was more than gratitude, more than survival. Something ancient had been awakened the moment he shared that chocolate bar, and now, in the whispers of the dark, Daniel realized he wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was bound to her, and whatever hunted them would never stop. The night was far from over. The ruins were quiet again, but Daniel could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing on him. The girl leaned against his shoulder, her glow dimmed, her body exhausted. She had used too much strength to drive away the beast, but Daniel knew it wasn't gone for good. Predators didn't leave their prey without reason. He helped the girl to her feet, guiding her through the rubble. The cold air bit harder now, and every shadow seemed alive. The broken city stretched endlessly, a maze of collapsed walls and shattered bridges. Daniel's instincts screamed that they were being herded, not hunted blindly. And he was right. The horn sounded again, low and cruel, rolling through the streets like thunder. The girl froze, her silver eyes wide. She whispered one word that made Daniel's blood turn cold. "Hunters." From the rooftops, dark shapes appeared, silhouettes against the broken moonlight. The hunters were back, their bone masks glowing faintly red. Spears crackled in their hands, blue sparks dancing with each movement. Daniel tightened his grip on the broken knife. It was all he had left. "Run," he whispered to the girl, but she shook her head fiercely. "No, bond together." Before he could argue, the hunters dropped from the rooftops, landing with heavy thuds. 3 at first, then 5, then more, surrounding them in a tightening circle. Their leader stepped forward, taller than the rest. His spear burned brighter, humming with deadly energy, pointed it directly at Daniel. His voice was harsh, filled with contempt as he spoke in their guttural tongue. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "You don't belong. You will die here." The girl stepped in front of Daniel, her small body trembling but defiant. She shouted back in her own language, her voice cracking yet strong. Her hands glowed faintly, though weaker than before. She had little energy left. The hunters roared in fury, stamping their spears against the ground. Sparks lit up the circle. Trapping them in a cage of light, Daniel's heart pounded. He knew they couldn't fight like this, not with only a broken blade and a girl who could barely stand. Still, he moved to shield her. His voice was low, steady. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The hunters laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. The leader raised his spear, stepping closer. But then something shifted. The girl pressed her glowing hand against Daniel's chest. Silver light spread from her palm, wrapping around him like a second skin. His body trembled, his vision sharp. For a brief moment, he felt strength rush through him, Malian strength. The hunters froze, their red eyes widening. They hadn't expected this. Daniel looked at the knife in his hand. It glowed faintly now, silver light running down the blade. His heart pounded with a new fire. The pursuit was no longer one-sided. For the first time, Daniel felt it. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. The hunters did not move at first. Their red eyes burned through the bone masks, watching the silver light dance over Daniel's body. The leader tilted his head, as if uncertain whether to strike or retreat. For the first time, Daniel saw hesitation. In them, the girl's hand still pressed against his chest. Her glow flickered weakly, but it was enough to keep the shield around him alive. Daniel could feel it like fire in his veins, raw energy pulsing through every muscle. The broken knife in his hand no longer felt like a scrap of metal. Felt alive. The hunters growled, their formation shifting. The leader barked an order, and two warriors advanced. Sparks from their spears lit the ground as they came closer. Daniel stepped forward before they could reach the girl. His body moved faster than his mind.
Ow.
The knife flashed, leaving a streak of silver in the air.
Hey.
The first hunter's spear cracked in two. The second stumbled back, shocked, as Daniel shoved him away with strength he didn't know he had. Silence fell. The hunters muttered among themselves, their red eyes flashing with unease. The girl sagged against Daniel, exhausted, but her glowing eyes lifted to meet his. She whispered in broken English, her voice soft but clear. "Now you see, not food, not gift, bond." Daniel frowned, his chest heaving. "What bond?" She touched her heart, then touched his. "Life. Tide you gave last bite, my people. Oldest law. Share food and hunger means forever." Her words sank into him like stones dropped in water. He thought back to that moment, breaking the chocolate bar, handing it to her. He had seen it as kindness, nothing more. But to her, it had meant something sacred. The hunters roared suddenly, their leader slamming his spear into the ground. The earth cracked under the strike. His guttural voice carried anger, maybe even fear. The girl shouted back, her voice shaking but filled. With fire, she pointed at Daniel, then at herself, pressing her palms together as though sealing something invisible. The hunters froze, their eyes narrowing. They understood her declaration. Daniel finally realized, by their law, by their tradition. He had claimed her, and she had claimed him. The hunters weren't after the girl anymore. They were after him, the outsider, who had broken into their ancient bond. The girl's head dropped onto his shoulder, her body trembling. They cannot break bond, but they kill to stop it. Daniel clenched his glowing knife tighter. He looked at the hunters closing in again, their rage boiling over. He thought of the chocolate bar, such a small thing, now the cause of all this. But deep inside, he felt something shift. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was protecting something far more important. Asterisk, the circle of hunters tightened. Their spears crackled with blue fire, the sound hissing like snakes ready to strike. Daniel stood tall, his body glowing faintly with the girl's silver bond. The broken knife in his hand pulsed with light, almost like it had a heartbeat of its own. The girl leaned weakly against him, her energy fading, yet her eyes burned with determination. She whispered one word, "Together." Daniel nodded. Wasn't a fool, he knew the odds. 10 hunters, 1 human. 1 exhausted alien girl. By every rule of survival, they should already be dead. But something inside him refused to back down. He had seen her stand for him against the beast. Now it was his turn. The leader of the hunters raised his spear high, and with a roar, Charged, Daniel moved, faster than he thought possible. The first hunter thrust forward, but Daniel sidestepped, the glowing knife slashing across the spear's shaft. It shattered in sparks. Before the warrior could react, Daniel struck with his shoulder, sending the armored figure crashing to the ground. Another spear came from the side, but Daniel spun, the silver energy guiding him. The knife clashed against the weapon, sending a wave of light across the ruins. The hunter stumbled back, shocked. The others hesitated. Growling in frustration, the girl lifted her trembling hands, her silver glow flaring weakly, but enough to push against the circle. The hunters faltered as a wave of light rippled outward. Her voice rose, chanting in her native tongue. Her words filled with fire. Daniel fought harder, his knife flashing, his movements fueled by something beyond human strength. For every strike, he felt her energy flowing into him. For every step, he knew she was with him. Even if her body was breaking, the hunters regrouped, their leader stepping forward with a roar. His spear struck down like lightning. Daniel raised his knife to block, and the ground shook with the impact. Blue sparks clashed with silver light, blinding both sides for a moment. Daniel gritted his teeth, pushing back. His arms shook, but he refused to give in. He shouted through clenched teeth, "You're not taking her!" The girl screamed, pouring the last of her strength into him. Her glow flared like a star, wrapping Daniel completely. For a heartbeat, he felt unstoppable. With a final surge, he twisted the knife upward. The leader's spear cracked, shattering into fragments. The hunters stepped back, their red eyes wide with disbelief. Silence fell over the ruins. The hunters did not roar again. They hissed in anger, but their leader raised a hand, signaling retreat. One by one, they melted back into the shadows. Daniel stood panting, the glow around him fading. His knife dimmed, returning to a broken piece of metal. The girl collapsed into his arms, her body cold and trembling. He held her close, his heart pounding. They had survived the stand. But survival had come with a price, because now both of them knew this fight was only the beginning. The ruins were quiet again, too quiet. Daniel sat with the girl in his arms, her faint glow flickering, like the last flame of a candle. The hunters had retreated, but he knew it wasn't mercy. They would return with more numbers, with more rage. The girl's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "You mine, forever." Daniel didn't fully understand what that meant, but he knew enough now to realize he had stepped into something far greater than he ever imagined. One act of kindness, half a chocolate bar, had bound him to her, tied his life to hers. He glanced at the broken knife in his hand. The glow was gone.
Ow.
Without her strength, he was just a man again.
Ow.
But when he looked into her silver eyes, he felt a fire stronger than any weapon. The wind carried a sound through the ruins' drums, low and steady, far in the distance. Daniel's gut tightened. The hunters weren't retreating out of fear. They were preparing for something larger. The girl sat up, swaying but determined. "They tell story now. Human broke law. Human bonded one of us. Whole clan. Come." Daniel's chest tightened. "So this doesn't end here." She shook her head slowly. "No, this beginning." He looked out across the broken city, the shadows stretching toward the horizon. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. He hadn't chosen this path, but it was his now. The girl reached for his hand, squeezing it with surprising strength despite her fragile body. Her voice was steadier now. "Not curse. Gift. You gave me life. I give you mine. Together strong." Daniel's throat tightened. He had fought wars for orders, for nations, for survival. But this was different. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting against something. He was fighting for someone. The moonlight washed over the ruins, and in that moment, Daniel knew the galaxy would hear of this. A human soldier had bonded with an alien girl, not by power or force, but through a single act of kindness. And no law, no tradition, no army could erase that. In the distance, the drums grew louder. The hunters were calling their kin. War was coming. Daniel stood, pulling the girl to her feet. She leaned against him, her silver glow faint but unbroken. He tightened his grip on the broken knife and looked into the darkness ahead. "They'll come for us," said quietly. The girl nodded. "Let them come. We ready?" And with that, the human and the alien girl stepped forward into the night, bound by a bond older than war, stronger than fear. Their unseen future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous. But together, they were no longer prey. They were something far more powerful,